Who will win the other starting linebacker job opposite of Leighton Vander Esch? All that and more this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, we are answering the listeners' questions today, and let's get right into it. This first question is from Matt. He wants to know how much playing time is up for grabs for Damone Clark, linebacker Damone Clark, and or Jabril Cox. Are they set to fight for a starting job?
I think it's going to be interesting, right? I mean, I think we feel obviously pretty confident that Leighton Vander Esch is going to take a lion's share of the snaps at linebacker. You know, the thought process is that we saw so much of Clark last year playing linebacker that we assumed he would come in, and he availed himself well too. It's not like we saw a lot and he played poorly. He showed the kind of athleticism we expected. You know, he moved really well, and I think he improved as the season went on. So I think we've all kind of penciled him in as a starter, and I think which is partially why we weren't necessarily huge on getting linebacker early in this draft, but the Cowboys did get a linebacker in the third round, and from everything that we've heard, they're big fans of him. So I think that we have to at least introduce the possibility that Overshown is going to get an opportunity to take some of these snaps when Clark is off the field, and that it may actually be closer to a true competition or at least a situation where they have packages where Overshown is going to play and Clark won't be on the field. And that the playing time, the snap time, maybe not a direct competition for the will linebacker spot, but maybe it's more of a rotation with Overshown coming on the field, for some extra snaps for some special packages that they have planned for him.
All right, there's a lot to unpack here. Let's start with this. You mentioned Leighton Vander Esch. He's going to be the clear-cut starter. I've got to imagine that he's going to play probably close to 100% of the snaps. As long as he's healthy, he's going to be on the field. So in an ideal world, what is the type of linebacker that you would like to pair with Vander Esch? Is it somebody who is better at taking on blocks in the run game, or is it somebody who has sideline to sideline speed, somebody who can cover more? What do you think?
I mean, it feels like what they're looking for is more of an all speed linebacker crew, right? Like even with Vander Esch, I mean, he's a bigger middle linebacker type, but I mean, speed is his calling card, and length. I mean, he's not, despite his size, he's not engaging with guards and shedding blocks and getting behind the line of scrimmage. He's running sideline to sideline, using his big arm, his arm length to kind of wrap around and prevent running backs from getting away. And I think that ultimately, that he is the kind of exception to the Dan Quinn linebackers. Like Dan Quinn would rather his linebackers kind of look like what we've seen from Clark, what we've seen from really Overshown too. I mean, Overshown isn't so far off a Dan Quinn model of linebacker. So I think they have Leighton Vander Esch in there because he can do that, all those things that a lot of those quicker, speedier linebackers can do. But he's also got some heft to him so that he gives a little bit more physical presence. I think opposite of him, they're just going to lean heavily into that, 220 to 230-ish sized, 6 foot to 6'1" type body style that is what he prefers the position. So I think you'll see Clark, you'll see Overshown, we'll see all the kind of down roster linebackers in this role. I think it doesn't, they all are all the same for the most part. So it's really Leighton that kind of stands out from the crowd a little bit.
Yeah. Just to go back and mention Dan Quinn's history in Seattle, they had Bobby Wagner, who was 6 foot, maybe 240 pounds when they drafted him.
Yeah.
Maybe. And then Atlanta, it was Deion Jones, who was 6', 228, I think, coming out of LSU.
Right. Yeah.
There was Duke Riley, who they drafted in the second or third round, that was at 6', 222. They drafted Jabril Cox. Now they drafted Overshown. It's pretty clear that they want that guy that can run sideline to sideline because of a couple of things. Like I think back to both 49er playoff games. They got crushed when it was some of the outside zone runs, and their linebackers just couldn't get to the sideline to make the plays, right? So to me, even though Damone Clark is really athletic, I think Overshown is a little bit more of that guy that can roam sideline to sideline. So I do wonder, like, are they potentially grooming Overshown to be the starting linebacker here by midway point of the season, by next year? I could see it. Plus, I think draft capital tells us a lot, right? Like Damone Clark went in the 5th round. The Cowboys got him in the 5th round because of a neck injury. So there's a discount there. But the fact that the very next year that they turned around and drafted a top 100 linebacker tells you that they want more from that position, right? So I do wonder, have we been, mistakenly just penciling in Damone Clark for a starting job when in reality the Cowboys might view that as a camp battle?
Well, and the other thing to consider is that, look, I mean, as much as we want to talk about it being a 2 linebacker starting crew, these guys rotate a ton. And I mean, because they play a lot of snaps. And on top of that, they're also going to be the crux of your special teams units. These 6 foot to, like I said, the 6 foot to 225 to 240 pound, 250 pound guys, they are who are going to be making up the majority of all of your special teams units. So it makes sense to kind of load up on these guys, even if they aren't necessarily, playing starting snaps immediately, because at the very least they'll be part of a rotation. Like Overshown's going to get on the field and he's going to definitely play a bunch of special teams. So they're going to get value out of him right away as they're working him into becoming a starter, depending on how quickly that takes. And even if he does become a starter, it doesn't mean that we're not going to see a lot of Clark, a lot of Cox. These guys will be rotating in because all these guys need breathers. It's a ton of snaps. There's a ton of physicality. The linebacker position is the running back of the defense, in the sense that it's constantly taking physical abuse. They wear down easily, so you need guys to kind of rotate in and out to kind of keep everybody fresh.
I will also say it just might depend on the matchup, right? They've played some very different types of teams this year with them playing the AFC East, right? You play the Bills, you might want somebody who is a little bit better in coverage, right? To stop a Dalton Kincaid or whoever, right? You play New England a couple of weeks later, they're going to be more, tight formations, want to run the ball. That's when you might want your bigger linebackers on the field in Damone Clark and Leighton Vander Esch. So it'd be interesting to see how the Cowboys rotation is there. I don't think we see 2 linebackers get like 95% of the snaps. I don't see that happening this year. Maybe next year if one of these guys breaks out, but something would have to change pretty dramatically for that to be the case.
Yeah, I just think that they have a lot of, good to very good talent. They don't have, if they had elite player at the very, very top, maybe they play him full time. But I think the way it's built right now, the way this roster is built right now, I think you rotate all these guys to keep them fresh because you've got a group of really good players.
Yep. All right, let's talk about if the Cowboys should make a move to put them over the top and be all in this season next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. You could bet on the Celtics tonight. I believe they're -8 to continue the series and have it go back to Miami for a Game 6. There is no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Every dayers. Tomorrow on the show, Landon and I are going to review some of the OTA news and nuggets coming out of Cowboys camp, so make sure you tune in for that. This next question, Landon, comes from Zach. He wants to know, Do the Cowboys need to make any more moves to put them over the top?
I mean, there's always a move that can be made, and I think as far as, putting them over the top, I think as it stands right now, it would have to be a pretty big move to kind of move the needle at this point, right?
Like just bringing in a starting caliber left guard, move the needle. I mean, like that's a need, but I don't think that
I
changes
don't think
their
it is.
trajectory or anything like
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
Right?
I think because the thing is that look, we don't have a solution, that I can give you at left guard, but there are options, right,
Yes.
on the team that are good. That there are
Yep.
multiple good options, I think, So it's not like it's a glaring hole. It's just an uncertainty because we just don't know exactly
Yeah.
how they're going to line these folks up. So, I mean, I think that there are always, the roster building is 365 days a year or whatever you want to say. That is true. But if you're talking about something that, quote unquote, puts them over the top, I would imagine that's something that would need to move the needle pretty hard to kind of increase the odds of where they are. They're at a good spot. I think the problem is that in order to move the needle, like, from where they are, it would take something monumental because they're already in a kind of good spot. So
Yeah.
if you want to trade a first round pick for a,
The name.
I don't
Okay, so
know, like, honestly.
here's the name for me.
Yeah.
There's one player that's currently in the contract dispute that I think would move the needle, but it would cost you a lot in terms of draft capital, and it would probably end up costing you a player like Trayvon Diggs down the road because of the contract. It's Quinnen Williams for the Jets,
Yeah.
right? He wants to be paid like the top defensive tackle in the league. I don't know if the Jets want to give him that much money, but again, yes, that moves the needle. I think that makes the Cowboys maybe the favorites in the NFC. You pair him with Mozzie Smith and Osa inside. Now we're talking, but I don't know if you want to do that move.
Yeah, I
either,
mean that
right?
it risks your long term viability because obviously, like you mentioned, it puts Trayvon Diggs signing it at risk, and it's one of those things where does it move the needle enough to make it worth losing a cornerstone player on this defense? Not that Williams himself wouldn't become a cornerstone player
He
on the
is. Yes,
defense,
he absolutely is.
but I think it's something where like I said, once you get to a certain spot, like the risk versus reward changes. Like if you're in the middle tier, why not trade for a Quinnen Williams or whatever? But if you're like at the top and you've got a bunch of young players who you'd like to keep so you can kind of continue to be in that area, there is it changes the angles a little bit to say, well, yes, this obviously improves our team, but does it improve our team to enough to make it
Yep.
worth the risk of losing a cornerstone player who's young, who you think you could have on your team for a long time?
I don't think the Cowboys' issues are lack of top end talent, like
Yeah.
blue chip guys. Like
Yeah.
that's
kind of what I've been trying to get at, I guess. Thank you. That's the best way to quantify it.
right.
That.
I think what they need is a lot of their like guys 17 through 35 to just play better, be a little bit more consistent. If that's the case, they're going to be just fine. But they've got arguably the best edge rusher in the NFL, arguably the best cornerback in the NFL, one of the top 7 or 8 receivers in the league, maybe the best guard in the NFL. Like they're fine talent wise. They just need a couple other guys.
They need Michael Gallup to be healthy. They
Exactly.
need, Adogba to play well at left guard, even if he's the backup. They need,
you need
Steele
Damone
to come
Clark,
back
who we just
healthy.
got done talking about,
Yeah.
to be a solid linebacker. Doesn't have to be a
Yes.
Pro Bowl, but just be
Yeah.
somebody that you can rely on game to game. If that happens, the Cowboys will be just fine. Let's get to some more questions. This one from Mike. If you could have one guy, and actually this is kind of ties into what we were talking about. If you could have one guy have a I am him season in year 2, would it be Sam Williams because of the position, or Deron Bland because of the cornerback room, or again, is it Damone Clark because could potentially be a starting linebacker for you?
I think if Sam Williams became like a dominant pass rusher suddenly overnight, or became like a dominant defensive end, I mean, now you're cooking, dude. Like, I mean, not that you would already have problems at this point, like trying to get everybody on the field. And I think that Bland can be I think the answer could probably similarly be with Bland as well. But I think that getting And I feel like Sam Williams could get there. Like he's shown like on a per rush basis that he has something there, right? Sure. If he's able to kind of come into his own and find a way to take, a big leap forward, it would make a pass rush that is already incredibly formidable, maybe the best in football, and take it to another level. So I think the idea that making a strength stronger is a incredible thing. I think I would probably say Sam Williams.
I like that answer. I'll go Jake Ferguson. Right.
Okay.
What if Jake Ferguson turns into like the 8th best tight end in the NFL this year? And let's say he's Dallas Goedert or TJ Hawkinson. And now you've got CeeDee Lamb in the prime of his career. You added Brandon Cooks. You've got Michael Gallup, a year and a half removed from the injury, and you didn't get worse at tight end. And in fact, maybe you upgraded a little bit. That's when this offense could really be hard to stop. If you have all of that, plus you've got Tony Pollard in the backfield, it's the one position on offense that I love the depth, but I'm still a little bit concerned about, like, okay, it's
what's it going to look like?
Yeah. What's it going to look like? Who can I trust? Is this guy somebody that makes defenses have to account for him? We'll see. But if Ferguson turned into that guy, this offense would be pretty awesome.
I mean, the name that kind of came up, just because you didn't throw his name out there, but honestly, the name that kind of came up is Tyler Smith. I mean, if Tyler Smith comes in and takes the big step forward that we all hope he does, no matter if he's playing tackle or guard, he's going to have a huge influence on how, effective this offense is. So, any one of these guys, obviously, I mean, it's easy to give an answer. I think the good news for the Cowboys is that all the guys that we just listed, they got some pretty serious playing time last year. They got some experience. So I would say that all of them are eligible for that kind of jump. We'll see if it happens.
All right. We've got one more question about Dak Prescott versus the defense that we will get to next. All right, Landon, our final question here comes from Kyle, which is a really, really good one. He wants to know, what would take the Cowboys further? A career year from Dak Prescott or the record-setting defense? I think in a vacuum, as you think about this, quarterback, if you have elite quarterback play, it's going to be, your team's going to be fine. But one of the reasons why we don't care as much about defense as offense is because it's just not sustainable year to year. But if you told me going into the year, like, this is one of the best Cowboy defenses ever, I might take that.
Yeah, I think it's worth the conversation. I mean, it's at least close enough that it's worth, the back and forth. I tend to think that it's the quarterback, though, because of all the reasons you mentioned, right? Like, if Dak has a career year, I think the defense will probably be very good no matter what. Maybe not elite, but I think, will be very good. And I think that those two things combined could easily be what you need to kind of get yourself over the hump. But I think it's certainly, like you said, I think it's certainly a debate. I think it's not as clear cut. I think a lot of what we talk about with the quarterback position is because it's one person, it's one player, right? And so there's a lot of the importance of just how important that one player is. But when you're weighing the whole position versus the whole other side of the ball,
I guess the reason I'm thinking maybe defense, right, is because you look at some of the quarterbacks they have to face this year. Like, the AFC East is loaded with quarterbacks. Josh Allen, Tua, Aaron Rodgers now. Plus, you've got to play the Eagles twice, and you've got Justin Herbert early in the season. Like, if they put together a year where they only gave up like 19 points a game, and they led the NFL in turnovers, and they were number 1 in yards per game, even if Dak had a bad year, they're going to be fine, right? Like, even if he had a worse year than he had last year, they're still going to win a bunch of football games. So I do think if this defense was number 1 in the NFL in most categories, it probably means they're going to be the number 1 seed in the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, ultimately, if you're phrasing it like, I'm predicting the results because they're having an elite year, which I guess you are technically, and you're putting it in context of the season, then maybe it is a better choice to have an elite defense, because you're predicting how the other team's offense will have done
Right, exactly.
against your defense.
If you know ahead of time, I'm going to either get 48 touchdowns from Dak or my defense is only going to give out 18.5 points per game, I'll take the defense, right?
Yeah, because
There's a lot that could go wrong in the other way, right?
I feel like Dak can score more than 18 points a
Yes.
game. Yeah, that's true.
Let me rephrase the question this way. What do you think is more likely? Dak having a career year or the defense just being off the charts amazing?
I think it's tough to say. I mean, because I had this conversation with someone the other day. Defense is so hard to replicate year to year. I mean, it's so much based on who you're facing. And look, the Cowboys are going to be facing kind of a murderer's row of quarterbacks this year. I tend to think it might be more likely that the Cowboys have that Dak has a career year. Not to say that the Cowboys defense will be bad or even worse than they were last year, but in order for them to be like elite top of the league, I mean, they're going to have to produce numbers on par with what they did last year and better against
playing better offenses,
much better offenses, right?
Yeah.
Like much better. So I think that's why it would be difficult to predict that, is because and much like because I made this same argument going the other way last year, right? Is that this is a better defense. I was saying this last year. This was a better defense than it was previously, and they're playing worse competition. That's why I felt like the defense could sustain. I still think the defense is going to be very good, but it's a much taller ask to ask them to be better against this set of teams that they're playing this year versus the teams that they played last year.
I agree. And for Dak, it might not be total yards and touchdowns, right? But it might just be efficiency, right? If he could get back to that, I don't care about the turnovers as much as other people do, but if he can be super efficient, he's averaging 8.5 yards an attempt, and his passer rating's over 110, and he's going 17 of 22 every single game. That's where Dak could have a career year in my eyes, right? Not necessarily just based on pure counting stats.
Yeah. I mean, I think efficiency is important.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah. So I think that's really where Dak thrives when he's playing good football. So I think a return to more efficient football, I think would produce a career year for Dak.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Again, every dayers, tomorrow on the show, we're going to break down all of the news and nuggets coming out of Cowboys OTA. So make sure you guys tune in for that. You can follow the show on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you guys right back here tomorrow.